is going to be from Crystal. All of
Good evening, candidates. I am super excited to be a part of the committee to host. My name is Crystal Bryan. I'm a member of the Cuyahoga Democratic Women's Caucus, here with your first question to kick off this evening. So, do you support a co-responder model for police reform? Why or why not? We will go in a specific order. So I will start by calling off each candidate's name that we would like to answer, starting with Justin Bibb.
Well, thank you to all the organizers for putting together this important dialogue this evening. And Crystal, your question could not be more spot on. We are truly in a moment of reckoning right now in this country and in the city about how we do a better job of rethinking what policing should look like. And unfortunately, Cleveland has been a master class on what not to do. And it's time that we invest in having a co-responder model of policing in all of our 5 police districts across the city. We've seen the positive results of this in a pilot we did between 2016 and 2018, and we found that in the 2nd district, nearly 37% of all the 911 calls didn't require a police armed response. And so for us to truly build community trust and build community credibility and restore the bonds between the police and our residents, we have to get to solving the root causes of violent crime and trauma all across our city. And having a co-responder model is a good step in the right direction. But in addition to that, as the next mayor, I intend to add a 4th option to 911 around mental health. So we can train our dispatch agents inside our dispatch centers to triage these calls appropriately so we can truly solve the root causes of violent crime all across our city.
Thank you, Mr. Bibb. Next, Ross DeBello.
Thanks, Crystal, and thank all 3 organizations for hosting and making us, be accountable and answer these questions. I absolutely do support a co-responder model. So I worked at the Justice Center, first at a law office. The law office is Cassandra Collier Williams from 2009 to 2012. We did a lot of criminal defense. Then I followed her to the Court of Common Pleas, the felony court, and I was her staff attorney. So I handled the management of the civil cases. One of our civil cases was, a now deceased Asian American gentleman who was having a purely mental health incident, right? His sister called, and his sister called. 2 police from a suburban police department came, were fearful, shot him, he passed away. So I've seen this firsthand, right? These are tragedies that are preventable with better communication, emergency communication to dispatch, whether it's, I might want to add a 5th and a 6th dispatch line, right? Like mental health, drug abuse, overdose, and also code enforcement. How we'll iron it out would be a problem if I'm victorious, but absolutely for a co-responder model. And we can prevent this stuff, but we do have to make the correct hires, right? We've got to hire more mental health professionals, code enforcement, things of that nature. But we definitely need to change things to prevent these exact scenarios, which creates a death, right? And then the drain on our resources because of how costly these lawsuits are, which unfortunately I have a lot of experience with.
Thank you, Mr. DeBello, for that answer. I'm going to repeat the question just in case anyone has just joined us. So for the candidates, do you support a co-responder model for policing reform? If why or why not? And so the next person up is candidate Kevin Kelly.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank all 3 organizations for hosting tonight. I do support the model, but I just want to caution people that there's no easy fix to what we're doing, and adding social workers to calls for service or adding mental health professionals to calls for service is challenging in a lot of ways. First off, we have to realize that the number of calls for service where that would be appropriate is relatively narrow. Take, for example, the tragedy of domestic violence. That is something where there's obviously a need for social work, but the volatility of the situation needs to be responded to make sure that order is preserved. And the service portion can be a follow-on to that, can follow up. But if we're talking about responding to issues of a homeless person that is having difficulty, that is something where you could certainly add a social service element to the policing response. There is an opportunity to improve the way that we respond to these types of calls for service, but it can't be for every call. It can really only be for those narrow universe of calls for service where there isn't the immediate threat of violence, and the safety of the social worker needs to be, or of this person needs to be kept on the forefront, because the police are trained for these situations, and we would have to do a lot of training to get people ready to deal with these very crisis situations.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Next is Dennis Kucinich.
Thank you. And thank you for the question, because it really lends itself to much broader discussion about what we as Clevelanders might be able to do to redefine policing. And the way that, as mayor, I intend to do it with your help is through creating a cabinet level Department of Peace, where we make the organizing principle of our city peace, peaceful neighborhood and peaceful communities. And law enforcement is an adjunct to that. It's not the central operating principle of the government. And another principle that would conjunct with peace would be restorative justice. We must look at this in the broadest way, and we must apply it in a way that can work. So what I've said is that as an ex-mayor of Cleveland, in order to ensure public safety, we'll hire another 100 police. Those police will have to be trained in not just law enforcement, but in civil liberties and constitutional principles and in racial sensitivity. But beyond that, we need to have 100 individuals at least who would be training crisis intervention, who would know conflict resolution, and they would work with the police department in order to be able to respond to those matters that do not require an armed response. So the idea of a co-response is a great idea. And I think that the implementation of it can happen. But the central organizing principle of the community needs to be shifted from just simply law enforcement to peace, and to law enforcement as an adjunct, where we have more police, where we have the police that are well controlled by the civilian authority, supported when they're effectively crime fighting, and also to have crisis intervention individuals who are trained social workers who can help to respond. And again, with my approach, we change it all. We change the inflection and the nature of law enforcement.
Thank you, Mr. Kucinich. Next, Zachary.
Well, thank you very much. And I appreciate this opportunity and a great conversation tonight so far. And to echo the sentiments of Congressman Dennis Kucinich, I agree wholeheartedly. We've got to change the whole concept of policing. The way that we've been policing in the city of Cleveland has not been conducive to creating a safe community, not only for the people that live in the city of Cleveland, but the police officers that are sworn to protect and serve the citizens of the city of Cleveland. And therefore, we need a complete overall conversation, or how is policing going to be done going forward? I mean, if you just look at the poster child to what should have got us started on this conversation is Tanisha Anderson. I mean, that happened in 2019. And now in 2021, we're suddenly talking about whether or not we should be doing co-responder model policing. I agree that we should have been doing it. We should have started it then. We should be having it now. And we should be looking at how we should have made it better moving forward. You know, this is about creating a safer Cleveland. This is what this whole conversation needs to be about. And if we all agree that right now, as we sit here on this conversation, 103 people have already been killed here in the city of Cleveland so far this year. So the way that we're policing, the way that we're talking about safety in the city of Cleveland is not working. And therefore, we need to create models that we know across the United States has worked. And we know cities that have used the co-responder model has worked. We know that cities that have used what I've talked about, looking at safety from looking at criminal justice from a public health lens, and bringing in cure violence. That has worked. Real community policing has worked. The model we have in the city of Cleveland is not working. And as mayor of the city of Cleveland, I'm going to use a new model, a new reform model to ensure that the safety of the citizens are going to be intact and ensure that the police themselves are going to be safe at the same time.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. Last but certainly not least, candidate Sandra Williams.
Thank you so much, Crystal, and thank all of you for having me here tonight. My apologies for being late. I just got off another meeting. So I would say I do believe in the co-responder model for police reform. I also know that we do have a team going out with our law enforcement officers on a regular basis. They are not going out 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So yes, we do need to expand that. We know that the current model we have working with the Adams Board is working. It is helping diffuse situations that law enforcement officers are going through on a regular basis. And I will say this, as a parole officer, I've been called to the scene of many incidents that my parolees have been involved in. And it has been, some situations has been such that when law enforcement officers were called out, they did not know how to handle the situation, and it escalated to the point that the parolee was not only arrested, but charged with felonious crimes immediately, with the police not understanding what was happening to that person. But the time that individuals were calmed down and talked to the real problems that was existing, the situation de-escalated, and we handled the situation on a regular, fast basis without anybody being arrested. So yes, I do believe in this motto.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Thanks to all the candidates for their inclusive answers. I'll now turn it over